With that, I'm going to go ahead and get us kicked off. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Taking the Fear Out of Funder Communications with Rachel Werner. This workshop is being recorded and slides will be shared afterwards, so keep your eyes peeled for any follow-up emails regarding these slides and additional resources that Rachel is going to be sharing with you today. In case this is your first time here, this free grant workshop is brought to you by Instrumental. It's a partner workshop in which we collaborate with community members to teach grant writing to grant professionals for free. Our goal is to tackle some sort of problem that grant professionals often have to face, and then share ways that our platform can also help you in streamlining your workflows and helping you apply for more grants. Instrumental is the institutional fundraising platform. If you're looking to bring grant prospecting, tracking, and management into a single tool, then we can help you do that. And you can set up your own account and get personalized grant recommendations using the link on the screen, as well as in the Zoom chat. It'll be shared a few times during the demo portions of today. Now, with that housekeeping out of the way, I'm very excited to introduce Rachel Werner. Rachel is a returning presenter, and she's the owner and CEO of RBW Strategy LLC. She has over 18 years of grants experience, and she and her team have collectively helped nonprofits garner over $160 million in grant awards and managed over $2 billion in grant funding. She's an active member of the Grant Professionals Association, Association of Grant Professionals, and is a certified grant professional and project management professional. If it's your first time here, as well as for returnees, just as a reminder, whenever you have a question, we ask that you input that into the Zoom chat with 3 hashtags. When that question is logged, I will reply back in the Zoom chat, but we use that in order to make it easy to flag questions out, since there's a ton of different people talking at once. But other than that, Rachel, feel free to take it away.
Sorry, didn't realize I was still muted. So thanks, everybody. I hope you're having a great day so far, and appreciate you taking the time to talk about something that is near and dear to my heart, which is funder communications and the integral part that plays in the research and grant strategy process. So just a way to learn a little bit more about you, if you can share in the Zoom chat your name, your organization, and how do you prefer to connect with funders? Do you like to chat with them on the phone? Do you like, well, even though in person is not as much of an option at this point, perhaps pre-COVID and after, things start to normalize a bit more, are you looking forward to those in-person meetings? What about email or social media shout outs? Because everybody kind of has a preferred style. So just kind of curious to see, what works for you and what you feel comfortable with in terms of your communication style. So this is what we're really going to be talking about today. We're going to talk about the fundamentals of effective prospect research, and then Will's going to lead us in a demo to kind of talk about some really interesting ways that we can take the funder information through the use of Instrumental into helping us sort of develop some collateral related to cultivation strategy. So we're going to focus on a prospect profile document that I will share with you. And we're also going to be using an email template. And so I think that you'll see through these exercises of a couple of different ways that we can use that research in a tangible way. And then, of course, leaving time for Q&A at the end. So let's talk about effective prospect research. So why do we want to start with research? Why is research, to me, the most critical component of your grant strategy? Is because it serves as the building blocks. If you don't find the right prospects, then all of your grant seeking efforts are going to be for naught. Really trying to determine those accurate and most reflective of your organization's values, your organization's mission, and then they align with those priorities. It really is critical, and it allows you to make educated decisions and work smarter and not harder. So that's really why prospect research is critical, and why I think spending the time to do that is much more important than submitting a grant application when you might not have the right information to know if that was the right funder or not. And so you don't want to end up with a bunch of declinations for those applications that you work so hard on. So that's why starting off with that research is critical. So what are really some critical things that we can find out about funders? And we won't really be doing this too much in the demo today, but if you were to, use Instrumental as a demo to gather that information, these are some things that I think are really helpful, and especially related to funder cultivation. Obviously getting the general information and the application deadlines, but also digging a little bit deeper and thinking about, what those funders are thinking about in terms of their priorities and what they're really focused on, and how they're trying to help the communities, and how they're really trying to ensure that their priorities are being met through the different recipients to which they award funding. And also looking at those, 990 forms, and really trying to get a sense of how you can dig a little bit deeper into learning a little bit more about those funders, about those trustees, and who the particular awardees are. And also, and I think this is part of the cultivation process, is determining if there's a connection, because sometimes when there's a lot of information about who to contact, perhaps you can leverage that partnership with someone within your organization. And of course, gathering information about the eligibility requirements and geographic area of focus are all kind of building out that profile for that prospect or that existing funder that you want to focus on. So in terms of funder communication, so now this is where we're going to segue from the prospect research into the actual cultivation strategy. What information is critical? But we're going to talk about these a little bit more in depth. But some of it is internal, and thinking about where your organization is and what information you need to gather, and also what you're looking to gather about the funder. So those kinds of things are really helpful. And we're going to start off with the case statement. I can't stress this enough, but your case statement is your why. Why are you seeking funding? Why do you exist? Why do you make an impact in your community? That really tells the story. If you can't really build out that case, how are you going to compel others to give? How are you going to educate a funder about what you do? So that is really important. And as well as understanding the funder priorities, because if you don't really understand what a funder gives and the means in which they give, then it's going to be a real challenge for you to prioritize and to think about, whether this is the right fit for you, and whether they should align with your organization, because it's really important. I can't tell you how many times someone has said to me, oh, you should apply to this foundation, only to find, well, they're only really focused on education and you're an arts organization, so really not a fit. And so making sure that there's a match with your priorities, or it's really not going to be successful. And what about those connections? Mentioned this before when talking about the information you want to gather. And it's not just, looking at the people who are on the board of the foundation, or the people who work within the foundation who are program officers, but also thinking about, if it's a corporate foundation, is there somebody within that corporate entity that can connect you with that corporate foundation? So giving that information to somebody on your team is incredibly helpful, because it can really help bridge, and especially for those where it's invitation only. And even though I know with Instrumental, it's only open opportunities, if there's perhaps that family foundation that you're trying to get to, or even trying to get to some of those corporate foundations that can be hard to connect with, this is a great way to do that. And I think it also is important to understand that timeline and that process for how a funder gives, because then that's going to give you enough time to advance your priorities and be able to map out a timeline for when you're going to reach out to that funder, and thinking about how you're going to track that information. And there is a way to do that in Instrumental. There's also, you can make a homegrown tool if that's, better for you, but just some things to think about as you're trying to figure out how to best connect with different funders. And of course, peer organizations, I think that they can be a great resource. Not only, let's say that you find out that one of your partners has received a huge grant from a funder that you have wanted to connect with for years. Is there someone you can talk to learn about how they went about that? Is there a way that you can perhaps connect with them about, taking a look at different ways that you can perhaps collaborate on an application in the future, and those are some things that you can think about in terms of stewardship, because a lot of times I know that nonprofits, it's difficult sometimes to leverage that information from other peer organizations, but to the extent that you have a good dynamic, it can be really helpful for you. So, and this kind of goes back to tracking and managing. So how are you going to manage this information? How are you going to track it? So if you don't have a software tool already, or if you're not using Instrumental, what kind of system would be helpful for you? And even using Google Sheets or Excel is a great way to start, because at least you can hopefully try to share access to information, whether you're using Teams or Google Sheets, or perhaps you're going to, and you have a project management system like Asana that can track that detail. There's some other things to consider. And so with that, we're going to kind of show this in action. So Will, I'm going to hand it off to you to, show how we can use Instrumental.
Sure. Sounds good. Thanks, Rachel. I just put in the Zoom chat as well in case you have never explored this before, but that's Rachel's link. It'll get you a 14-day trial of Instrumental. And what I wanted to show is a few of the things that Rachel's speaking to, and then we'll do some more integration with the templates and things like that she has prepared for today as well. So when you create at a high level, Instrumental helps you bring grant prospecting, tracking, and management to one place. And when you are setting up your account on Instrumental, you're going to have this sort of view in which you're going to be able to create your project and set it up based off of the name. So this could be a particular program or initiative that you're working on. And what the goal is here is for you to identify exactly what you're looking for in your funding. So once you set up this project, you would select things like the fields of work, the types of grants you're looking for, as well as the size of grants. And then when you've done that, you will end up with something that we call the matches tab. And these matches are going to, like Rachel said, show you only active grant opportunities that you can apply for. That said, though, something that is coming down the pipeline in the next month or so is we will be introducing a new feature to Instrumental for our Plus plan, in which will also match you to potential invite-only funders or funders that don't have websites as well. And so that is something to look out for if you are a current user of ours. But essentially in the matches section, what you will see is information about the funder, as well as 990 reports when they're available to be digitized, so that you can pull out insights about different funders and learn about them at a high level view. So what's different about this than most other grant prospecting tools is that we will only show you right now these active grant opportunities. These are opportunities that you can actually start applying for. And you'll see these nice digitized 990 reports that you can essentially use to dig into some of the information that Rachel shared in that earlier slide. So key people, key financial statistics. With our new plan that's coming out as well, you will be able to get the breakdown as to the giving trends over time on both the average and medians, as well as the average amounts for the grant awards over the years, as well as things like where past grantees are coming from and the most gived areas in terms of funders. So what you'll see here is I have this foundation, which we'll dig more deeply into later on in today's presentation. But essentially what you can see here is you'll see trends like what the average grant ranges were, where past grantees came from, as well as whether or not they are new grantees or returning grantees. And then you'll see breakdowns as to where they are funding the most. This answers the question that Rachel was saying earlier of, well, what if you're an arts organization, but the funder is mostly funding health clinics or something like that? It's not probably a very good fit for what that funder is looking for. And then from the tracking and management side of things, what you'll be able to do in Instrumental is you'll be able to track everything in the same place. And so a lot of times some people will do Asana coupled with Google Calendar, coupled with, Google Doc or something like that. Whereas people that bring their work into Instrumental essentially get dedicated trackers for every single project they're working on. So you can see in just this account, I have a ton of different projects related to all different sorts of program and initiatives for my nonprofits. But essentially what that allows me to do is it allows me to keep an active search for those grant opportunities, and also allows me to track everything kind of folder together so that when I save a particular opportunity, what I can get in the right-hand side here are all of the tasks and common things that you might need to do to get this grant to submission. And so I can track things in terms of the different statuses that it might be in my overall pipeline, as well as just add different tasks and choose who I want to send this to in terms of the people on my team, on my account. And I can also upload my final proposals in the same place as well. And so this kind of keeps everything in one place. You can see here for this particular corporate giving program that I actually have it already saved for 3 years, which makes it really easy if you are, just working on a returning grant and you just need to have something in the same place in terms of all the task management and deadlines that might be coming up. So once a week, Instrumental will send you 2 things. The first one is all of the matches that you have coming up in terms of your calendar. And then the other thing is you will get all the tasks that are coming up as well as the upcoming grant deadlines. So you might be wondering, what about the local opportunities that might not be on Instrumental? You can always add your own opportunity by clicking this add new button and then clicking the add one or upload many option in terms of that side of things. And so this can be really helpful because if you are a grant writer or you're part of a grant team that constantly has, different team meetings or board meetings where you need to pull something together for your board to review, you can always share a report really quickly. And then you can just generate a PDF report of what you're working on in just a few seconds. So you can see here how I created this report. And now I've got that PDF report ready to go for whoever my supervisor is or whatever meeting it might be for some more synchronous collaboration and things like that. And so those are some of the high level features. Speaking to some of the quick comments that just came up in the chat as well. There is a calendar view in the works right now. And so that will be coming in the future. There isn't a direct interaction with Raiser's Edge or integrations at this time, but that is something on our radar. And so that's something in which definitely keep your eyes peeled in the future on that. What most people will do today is they will export that CSV report and then import that into into their own CRM tracker. So you can use Rachel's link in the chat. It's instrumental.com/RBW. And the other thing I wanted to share with you guys is if you're using a current grant tool that you need to go to your direct supervisor or your board for approval of exploring Instrumental as an alternative, we have these new pages in the very bottom footer of our website where you can compare us with a ton of other common tools that people use to just understand the differences of our platforms and specifically bring that to whoever it might be for the approval process in that side of things. And our team is also always happy to answer questions that you may have as well. But yeah, and then the last question I'll answer before handing it back to you, Rachel, is in the last training, somebody we mentioned in the researching status that only changes if information changes are compared to other statuses. That is correct. And so something I want to highlight is in these trackers, when you are putting something in your researching section from your matches tab in Instrumental, what's going to happen is we are going to auto track that deadline as well as the information around that funder. And if there is a change, we will change that for you. But even if you don't change it from your researching section, so if October 16th comes around and we haven't moved this Alan Jones Foundation grant, we will start showing you the 2022 date instead of the 2021 date. And so the theory behind this from a high level is the things you leave in your researching section are always grants that you can start working on as your next up, next to bat, so to speak. And so that's what you'll see here in the researching section here. So yeah, that's pretty much Instrumental at a high level. Again, I'll leave that link in the description, but we'll be using it a little bit more later on anyways in the presentation. So we'll go into some of that and then I'll speak to the other questions that people may have later on in the presentation.
All right, thanks, Will. So now I'm just going to get back to the presentation and let's see. Okay, great. So we kind of went through these various slides. And one of the questions that we had is, what do you find to be the most relevant information to collect when you research prospective grant funders? Because I think that everybody uses a prospect research tool in different ways. So I'm curious, for your organization, what information is the most helpful for you? And just things to think about. Is it more of the analysis of the award amounts? Is it geographic area? Is it priority? And it could probably be a few things because you want to collect as much intelligence as possible to make the right decision, but just curious. And I'll read out geographic restrictions, previous grant award amounts. Yep, looking at their past awards. So I'm seeing some trends. Oh, contact information. That's also really important because sometimes you can be able to access somebody and try to correspond with them before an application is completed. So great. Thank you for sharing. Okay, so now we're going to actually talk about building out a prospect profile and what exactly that means. And I'm going to actually show you a sample one, and also one that we're going to build out using the funder information that Will was sharing before. So why is a prospect profile important? I think that this kind of one pager serves multiple purposes. One could be that perhaps you're connecting with a funder and you want to have a lot of critical information in a snapshot, and you don't want to have to toggle between screens, and you want to have some information available so that when you're having that conversation that you're able to discuss things in a more strategic and thoughtful way, and just having things at your fingertips. And also, I think it's useful to share with leadership or others who might be doing the cultivation on the organization's behalf, because then they have access to the critical information. So you don't need to have a long conversation, and you can share that with them and then provide any feedback or updates as needed. But I think that it's helpful to kind of have them understand, what information they should be talking about, what they should know about the funder. And it also just kind of eliminates some of the inefficiencies that can happen in the back and forth dialogue. And the other thing to consider too is that if for those perhaps where you're trying to share information with someone on your team or leadership about whether to go after an opportunity, is it might be helpful to just lay out some information to share, what this might not be the best fit, based on what we've identified. And perhaps that could be a critical discussion as well, because then you can avoid any unnecessary work, towards a potential prospect that is not a fit for you. So here's the information, the top 5 or 6 things that should be in the prospect profile, or AKA a funder fact sheet. Contact information for the funder's priorities and their giving areas, relevant deadlines in the application process, what the specific fit is with your organization, questions you probably want to think about asking the prospects, and any talking points. And again, that's actually extremely helpful for when you are getting to the point of actually trying to connect with the funder. So I'm going to actually show this in action by going through an actual prospect profile, and then we can go through that together. Sorry, just making sure that I share the right form. Okay, here we go. So here's the prospect profile, and I'm going to increase the size so that you can see it a little bit more. But the first thing, this is one that we've done before for another organization. It's been de-identified just to ensure that we're not going to be sharing any confidential information. But this is for the Dr. Scholl Foundation. So Dr. Scholl Foundation is a national foundation, and just wanted to show how we've put this together for a client. So the first thing is just having that contact information, I think, is really important, including the website. As you can see, there is no email address. So if you did have an email address, that would be really important to share, and also the names of anybody, any program officer. So that would be some other important information that would be good to include here, because then you know exactly who you need to speak with at the foundation. And then in terms of the funder priorities, you can see that they have a focus on an environment, and also just their giving areas are a little bit fluid. And this is also where you can dig into the 990s, and also, what Will brought up before, the breakdown of the different funding areas. You can even include the top 5 funder priorities based on the previous recent years of giving. That could be something that you put here as well. Also, any relevant deadlines, do they have multiple deadlines a year? Is it a rolling deadline? So those are the kind of things that you want to include in this document. And also just the specific mission priority fit. Now you can see that even though an organization might say, like, we support environmental programs, we support health and human services, you might be able to dig a little bit deeper to see what exactly do they fund. Do they fund capital requests? Do they fund general operating? Are they focused on specific programs or initiatives? That's something that will be extremely helpful to kind of tease out. And if there isn't a lot of information that you can distill from looking at instrumental or looking at the website, that's where you want to pose those specific questions. So you can see here that the question here was that, was concerning US and international. And so thinking about, well, do they fund organizations in the US that support international, or do they, so what does that breakdown look like? And so if there's other specific questions, like let's say that they have environmental priorities, we see that you have focus on environmental conservation and green technologies. They're one that you prioritize more than others. So those are just some things that you might want to think about, in terms of the questions that would really help you decide, one, whether you should go after this potential prospect, or two, how you would want to shape your proposal in order to meet those expectations that they've outlined. And so these are just some additional talking points. So, looking at like their past grantees, that would be something relevant, because you could say, oh, I see that you have focused on these other peer organizations. So it seems like you're in line with, the priorities that we have as an organization. And also just, understanding a little bit more about perhaps, how they organize their grant making, and also just seeing if there is a potential connection. And so that might be something else that you want to include. So other things like here, impact statistics, top outcomes, and so forth, those are things that you can actually include instead of just saying those impact stats, those top outcomes. You could actually include the specific statistics and outcomes in this document if that's helpful. And also just talking a little bit more about sustainability and thinking about, as an organization, because funders want to see that you have a lot of different revenue sources. So how are you diversifying that? And also thinking about, the success of that relationship. And so we're going to actually do a demonstration, and we're going to focus on the Max and Victoria Dreyfus Foundation. And, one of the things that I think is really helpful with instrumentals, that a lot of this information is kind of laid out for you. So you don't have to do a lot of hunting and pecking and, really trying to gather where is the relevant information. So, the first thing is that we really want to get that contact information, and making sure that you have, the names of anybody who you might be able to reach out to, and that sort of thing. So, I'm looking right now because I have printed out the Dreyfus Foundation information, so I wouldn't have to toggle between screens, is that, they have an address, they do have a website so that you can include that. And also they have the names of their board members. So I don't know if there's, there might be someone you can specifically reach out to, but that could be something that you look at a little bit more, and you might need to look at their 990 form to see who's listed as a staff member. And in terms of their funding priorities and programs, you can go back to that chart that was the breakdown. Sometimes it's listed out, but sometimes it's helpful to just look at that chart. And from what I see, their focus is really arts, culture, and humanities, human services, animal related, education, and healthcare. Those are their top 5. Now, if we're going to pretend that this is an environmental organization, and the environmental is number 6, so you can see that they're really not at the top. So this I would put as a mid-tier prospect because of that, because they don't necessarily prioritize, but that could be something that you might want to bring up, because then you can look at the different environmental grants that they've awarded and see if you would be in line with some of those programs. And another thing is that their average grant award is $7,500. If you're looking for awards that are higher than that, think about that as part of your strategy, and also thinking about, deadlines, because I think it's important to make sure that this is in line with your fundraising targets and your fundraising focus, and thinking about, how you would go about putting this as part of your grants calendar. Because I know that from my own experiences that this foundation awards twice a year. And so making sure that you include that. And also that specific mission priority fit with your organization. So if it's environmental, look at those specific environmental organizations to determine if you are going to be aligned with those types of funders. And also any relevant questions, because again, if you're environmental and they don't focus as much on that, those are the things that would be top of mind. And I would also ask about the environmental projects that they've awarded funds to. And then thinking about some other relevant talking points and thinking about, what information can I glean from this funder that would be helpful? I'm just curious, Will, if there's any questions.
I think what would be helpful is I'm going to share my screen with the profile so I can kind of show the accompanying parts that you just went over. That way, it's for those that might not have their instrumental account logged in or pulled up easily that you can reference this. And so if you want to go over at the high level, each of the key things, we can kind of go through them together with folks. So I think the first one was contact information. So the first thing you can do is you can just access this contact information section, and you're going to see the contact information as well as the key people laid out for you here. This is where you would start to fill in your document if you're using Rachel's template in terms of the phone number, as well as the website and things like that. Can you remind me what the second one was, Rachel?
Sure. Sorry, I have to get back to my, my sheet. Yeah. The second one is funder priorities and programs.
Right. So for that, that's going to be something that Arnie Plus Plan really helps nicely with, which is giving by NTE code. And so what you can see here is that this is what Rachel is talking about. If you're working on an environmental project, you can see that within this funder, this is their 6th priority relative to other common areas of funding that they have raised. So that's something to consider when you're evaluating where to prioritize this grant proposal versus, for example, another one in your pipeline and something like that. And then I think you also brought up grant amounts and things like that. So we can definitely dig into some of those as well. So I think you mentioned the 7.5K medium. And so what Instrumental will do as well is we'll run through whenever possible what the trends have been in terms of past grantees and what the median amount has been. This can help you when you're assessing and answering that question of what should I put in for my proposal in terms of what I should request for, or what's even the upper bound or lower bound of my request. And you'll also see that with respect to, in this particular situation, you won't see as much, but I'll show you another profile. This is a Cliff Bar Family Foundation. And what you'll start to see is you'll see trends like the average and median grant over the years. So you can see this is kind of trended down since 2013 or so. And then you'll also be able to see things like the differences between new grantees and returning grantees. So this can be helpful in answering the question as well in terms of some of those common questions that you might have of, is this funder actually receptive to new people submitting proposals, or is it something where, my time might be spent somewhere else? And so this can be helpful when you're just trying to identify what are some of those differences between the two types of recipients over time, and answering those questions that Rachel has outlined in her template as well. So these are often the starting points, but obviously one of the best ways you can actually learn even more is using either of these two contact references in terms of either phone number or to the website. And in terms of some of the points later on, this template will be shared in our follow-up too today. So be sure to keep your eyes peeled for that as well.
Great. And that's also extremely helpful because, Will, you can also actually look at the funder giving by area.
Yes.
Correct?
Yes.
So you
can always look at it by state as well. That's correct. So you can always dig into a particular state, and essentially from there, you'd be able to dig into, for example, Arizona, and it would output all the ones in Arizona, and you can kind of dig into, the respective purposes behind those things in the past.
And I find that to be extremely helpful because let's say that sometimes we get some kind of hits where I'm based in Maryland. So if it's a Maryland organization that we're supporting and the funder is located in Arizona, perhaps they moved to Arizona. So you can see that they've been giving to the same recipients time and time again. So even though they say that they give to Maryland, when you do a little bit more digging, you're just not quite sure if it's going to be the right fit if breaking in. And that's why looking at the new versus renewal is going to be really important for you. So I appreciate that. And I think that this is really helpful for you to understand. And do we want to pause for a second and see if there's any questions in the chat that we can answer?
Sure. One of the ones I just answered was in regards to Kathy saying it's not available for all funders. That's correct. We are parsing this based off of what's available in the 990 report. So in the case where the funder has not standardized their report yet, that's something in which we either need to manually go through that, or it's something in which we have to wait until the funder updates to a digitized version of the 990s. So what's happening in the next year is the IRS is requiring nonprofits to digitally file, which has been a big roadblock from a data, cleaning standpoint, because not every single nonprofit has been filing, digitally in the last few years. So that alone should lead to improvements in terms of the ability for us to parse through all of these pages and whatnot. In terms of keeping this template within Instrumental by funder, something I offered as a suggestion, since somebody had a similar question, is you can actually use your notes section in Instrumental for each of these opportunities. So when you're working in here, I've used this, and we've seen pretty extensive uses of this section since the free-form text area. What you could do is you could build something like, key information, and then put that information in, and then put deadlines and so on. And this would be rendered in your report when you share that report as well. So it would be part of that report when you download it for a PDF version of that report. Local, state, and federal grant opportunities. Yeah, that's correct. So when you are setting up your matches in Instrumental, you're going to see this drop down where you can see the different funding uses and funder types. So that will often include the federal, local, corporate opportunities and things like that. Yep. And then the other question is, does not have self-reporting system for foundations similar to other platforms. All information is pulled from 990s. That's correct. We pull all of our information from 990s or from the foundation's website. So that's something in which that's our primary data source for the information that you'll see on Instrumental. So when you use Rachel's link, what's going to happen is you're going to be led to this page. And then from here, you can just create your account if you haven't already created an account, and you'll be able to access your own matches and personalized results. Typically, what I've seen from running like hundreds of projects is we're always able to find 50 plus, grant opportunities that you might not be aware of. And so it's even helpful if you've used other tools before, because I've heard a lot of feedback where people will be like, oh, I found things that I've seen before, but I also saw 50% of the matches were completely new as well. So it can just be helpful to run a search just to see for yourself what is the best fits for you.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you, Will. And I think that we're going to, definitely leave some more time at the end for Q&A, probably be, 10 minutes at the end for that. So I think might be easier is for me to just go through the email template. I'm going to go a little bit into why this could be a real time-saving tool, and we have used this actually repeatedly. But I think that the things to really consider about the email template is that it's about connecting with funders that in advance of an application being submitted, because sometimes you can gather information, sometimes it can spark a conversation, spark a dialogue where there wasn't a relationship previously. And in some ways you consider this like a pre-LOI. You can consider this your first attempt to connect with them before you actually submit an application. And really just having some kind of standard template that you can customize based on the funders, and you can highlight specific areas that you might want to change. That's something that is really up to you, but these are just some things to consider. Now, this is a sample that we had, and I think it's really good, especially if you're not the one who's going to be emailing, to include the contact information above that is highlighted, just to make sure that you are able to share the information that's up front, that there's no confusion about who it needs to be sent to, what the subject line is, all of that, and then you could also highlight some things like this to see, like, Dear Mrs. Smith, let's say that you were going to, send this over to somebody, just making sure that that's highlighted, because you could say everything highlighted can be adjusted in other templates, and I think that you can also make it as lengthy or short as you feel is is critical, but it's really just about highlighting some certain things. You want to, lay the groundwork of who you are, and also just say, why you believe that there's a connection between you and the funder. And then you can kind of go into a little bit about who you are, what you do, and just about, the team that you have, and perhaps some priority areas. And then talking a little bit more about what your future plans are. So you can see there's some strategic goals in here, how you're collaborated with others in this space, and then always want to at the end leave a call to action. And just having that information is really, really important, because then it allows them to have a chance to respond to you. And one thing that I think is something that you want to consider is that you can include your telephone number, of course, include an email address. And I would add a note, say, I will contact you on the phone later this week. You could include that if you wanted to be more direct. If they don't necessarily have a phone number listed, that might not be the best approach, but just something that, you will follow up in a week or two with regard to this information. But I think that the email is really a great way to get your name out there before any type of application is submitted. And, I'm going to go back to the presentation, because I'm going to, sorry, let me just stop this. Okay, I'm just going to change the share screen so that I'm looking at the right thing. And talk about, what information will be helpful for you to have on hand when you're putting together the email template. And I think that the organizational case statement that I mentioned before is really helpful, because that will help you draft that paragraph about who you are, why you're in existence, what your priorities are. Of course, I mentioned the name and contact info of the funder, because that will allow it to be so much easier when you need to cut and paste into an email format. I think doing this in Word, or you can do it Google, whatever you think is easier for you if you use Teams, but just something that you can easily lift and share and adapt as needed. Also, who's your organization's point of contact, and just ensure that there's some confirmation on that, and that you have the correct information for that individual, especially now that we're all working in hybrid situations. So just making sure that you have their cell phone if they don't have an office phone that's as easily accessible. And I think the other thing that might be helpful for you, and just sort of learning more about that funder, you could take that prospect profile that was discussed in the last section, and also the instrumental data on that funder to really help build that, so you really understand, who the funder is, and what types of projects or initiatives they funded, and what their key focus areas are, because that'll really help bring some things to light, and kind of sharpen what you're trying to do and focus on the right things. So I think that those are just some things that can be helpful. And I can't tell you how many times we have used this kind of email template, because we have kind of taken the research and put it into this kind of email template, and then the prospect profile. And it's just these tangible items that you can actually use to help immediately cultivate and kind of help branch out some of the work that you're doing in this space. And I know somebody asked us in the chat room, might be a couple of people that asked if this information will be available, and the templates will be shared after the presentation. Correct?
That's correct. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay, great. Okay, so we're just going to kind of wrap it up and talk about the takeaways. So, one of the things that we discussed was the kind of information that's relevant and critical during prospect research, and Will did, the demonstration on the different funder profiles that I think have really expanded the ways in which you can use the research to your advantage in all different kinds of grant seeking activities, and either go or no go, and really make educated decisions about the kind of funders that you want to seek partnerships with. And also thinking about, what information do I need to have on hand in order to be successful? Things like your case statement, things like your strategic plan, things like, having access to the correct contact information for the calls to action with a particular funder. And also things like the collateral that should be developed. So the two items that we discussed were the prospect profile and also the email template, and showing how you can take the information from Instrumental and directly use them in these types of tools. And I have the follow-up at the end, but this is, how you can connect with me. As Will shared, there's the link to Instrumental if you want to do a demonstration and kind of play around with it yourself. You can also, sign up to do a 15-minute coaching session with me if you have some particular questions. And also you can feel free to email me on anything that comes up, because I know that there's some particular questions that might be more specific to your organization and more top of mind. And just a couple of other things before we leave it for questions at the end is that, here's some, here's the link to the demonstration. And also I know that Will's going to share the link to the feedback form, but we are going to be raffling off a 30-minute grants and fundraising coaching strategy with either me or one of my team members. So you can, click on that link and then you'll be able to be put in the raffle for that. So
yeah, so you can submit into that raffle. It's in the Zoom chat right now as well. If you don't have time for it later, essentially any of the actions on the screen, and we have some questions we're going to dig into. And then before, so if you have any questions, feel free to put them into the chat. But the first question for today is from Julia. And she was wondering if the email that you were showing has to come from the ED or if it can come from another person.
It can come from another person. Absolutely.
And then Anne asked, do you write the letter in the body of an email or do you send the attachment of the letter?
I would put in the body of an email.
Okay. Yep. Reagan asked how to politely reach out if the funder does not publicize their contact information, but you find it on their 990 report.
If they have it in their 990 report, my philosophy is it's fair game. I think you can just say, oh, I located your phone number, your 990 form, and just was wondering if we can, if I can ask a few questions or, connect with somebody at the foundation to chat further and see how amenable they are. Because I think that some are more open to having that dialogue than others. Or you could say, or I can follow up with an email, you can tell what's appropriate, because some people have different ways that they want to communicate.
Something I would also share as a tip when it comes to the templating of the Word doc is if you you can actually build those sorts of templates in most email clients as well. And so you can put in form fields, and from there, it will set it up so that it'll flag for you when you should swap out different things so that it's not, you don't mistakenly send a generic email without, changing a particular field or something in your template. So be sure to check those out with whatever email tool you're using. It's very common these days on that side of things. There's another, let's see, there was an earlier question, by the way, regarding instrumental and the researching section. Something I wanted to clarify is we are tracking all the deadline changes across opportunities in your matches. What I was saying was if you put something in your researching section, if that essentially means that you haven't technically moved it to a stage like planned or later, and therefore we will use the funder's default deadline for the auto rolling feature. However, we are still tracking other components of that. So if it's in your planned or it's in your view all tab, those deadlines are still being tracked in your weekly updates. So that's just a distinction that I wanted to clarify too. Kelly asked, would you recommend funder outreach before the grant-seeking organization develops ideas for projects to be funded?
Before the grant-seeking organization, I think you really want to come up with sort of a plan, because if you don't know what you're asking for, it's not going to yield as beneficial response. So I think you want to at least come up with either some kind of initiatives that seem like you'd like to be funded. It doesn't need to be fully fleshed out at that point, but you still want to have some kind of meat to discuss with a potential funder.
Sure. Pharaoh asked, is instrumental tracking ARP opportunities that are coming up from the federal side? We are. In fact, we also had a workshop with Julie Asel in terms of some of the ways that you can take advantage and identify ARP opportunities. So you can check out that workshop in our library. It's on YouTube as well as on our blog if you need a refresher there, or you just want a deeper dive into that topic. That was about an hour-long training as well that we recently ran. Greg asked, what's the best practice you've seen for funder outreach, or what's the most common mistake that you've often found people make?
Mistake is not connecting with a funder beforehand. And I think that best practice, trying to leverage the ambassadors for your organization as much as possible. So trying to engage board members or leadership in the cultivation role as on significant funders. I think that this is where it's important to kind of tier which ones they should be connecting with as opposed to the development director, development staff. So I think that it's really important to kind of triage those. And so that's what I would see as a best practice, because also to maximize efficiency, everybody's busy. And so if you're trying to cultivate a relationship with a funder and the award amount might be 5,000, that might not be the best place for insertion of the executive director. But if it's a 50,000, perhaps it would be, or perhaps it's a significant collaboration.
Great. Cynthia asked a question of, previously she reached out to a grantor and was told that we weren't in their geographical area. The funding summary on Instrumental said that they serve anywhere in the world and the grant is a really good match for their organization. Would you approach them again? I'll speak first to this, and I can say that what I would recommend you do is actually check out our training with Meredith Noble in terms of how to go from 100+ opportunities to the best fits for you. Within that, there are 7 questions that you might find helpful in reestablishing or reconnecting with that funder, and just assessing whether it's worth your bandwidth on that side of things. So that would be my first advice, but Rachel, feel free to add anything on top of that too.
I mean, I would also take a look at, Instrumental has it broken out by geographic region. So I suggest looking at your geographic area specifically to see who they fund.
Awesome. Let's see. There's a question in terms of how can African NGOs successfully apply for US grants?
How can
I think it's African-based NGOs apply for US grants is how I'm reading this question.
Right. I guess I'm trying to figure out, are you looking for funding through, I guess you're trying to seek funding through US-based funders for an organization that's international.
Yeah, that's how I'd read the question.
Okay. So, I mean, I think that you would have to look at the funder profiles and really understand. This is kind of similar to something that happened with the organization that I shared with the prospect profile, because that's something that, even though they're a US-based organization, they support work that's done internationally. So I think that you would really have to have that conversation, or to really see who they're funding. Are they funding organizations outside the United States, or are they funding organizations in the US that support organizations internationally? And those are 2 different things. So I think that really doing a little bit more digging into international, because international is a unique area. And so understanding the funding vehicles is really critical for you in determining who the right fits are.
Awesome. I think we've combed through all the questions. I'm just going to double check real quickly. There was a question earlier in terms of for folks that are already on Instrumental, in terms of whether or not they're on the right plan for things like that and whatnot. My answer to that is we're actually going to be launching formally our Plus plan in a few weeks. Every single customer of ours will get a free trial of the Plus plan as well. So just keep your eyes peeled on that. In terms of how to activate your trial. But we also do have an early bird discount for our existing customers, and you can email us at hello@instrumental.com if you want to learn more about how to lock in an early bird price there. If you enjoyed this grant workshop, you'll love our next one. It is on October 13th, covering 5 time-saving tips to boost your grant's productivity with Tiffany Nobles. You can register on our events calendar. It will also be sent in the follow-up, and then look out for your email later today for slides, the templates that Rachel shared today, as well as the recording for today's workshop. Other than that, thanks so much for attending, guys, and we'll see you guys in a few weeks.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.